Well, big things could be brewing over at the Supreme Court. Right now, we're in the window when justices will quietly announce their retirement. So could somebody actually go through and step down? To have this conversation with us, we brought in Clint Brown. He's the president of American Path. So, Clint, do you think that we're actually going to be seeing somebody retire this term, or are we just trying to read the tea leaves at this point in time?
Well, it's certainly reading tea leaves. We are in that window. It's usually sometime between April and the end of June when Supreme Court justices announce that they're going to retire. So we're in that window. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody's talking about the implications of that for President Trump's agenda. And I think it's time to start paying attention to it. Justice Alito was really spicy yesterday in the hearing about very explicit books in Montgomery County near here in D.C. where we are. Some people are speculating. There's been some Twitter buzz, some X buzz, based on his spicy exchange that maybe he's just done with it all. And I don't know. That's just the D.C. rumor.
Alito's been getting spicier and spicier throughout the years. Him and Thomas, though, are the rocks of the court. In the future, like Supreme Court justices, the Republicans should dispense with the, what are your feelings on the Constitution? What are your feelings on originalism? And just say, do what Thomas says. Will you do what Thomas says? Will you always vote the way Thomas says? Otherwise, you end up with the Supreme Court judges that we confirmed under Trump, who've made some very good decisions, but have made some absolutely horrible decisions. So I actually was talking to some folks from the White House who said that they expect some movement with Alito. Now, these people they're not privy to any special knowledge, but they're watching the same things you are. Expecting some movement potentially with Alito, and they're starting to look at different nominees to replace him, but I get that you have to do this. I get that you have to guard it. I get that you need to do it when you get the Senate majority and 53, not 51 or 49. But how do you even find someone who's as rock solid as either of those two justices to step in? Obviously, the metrics that we've been measuring or put conservative jurists by have failed on some pretty major things. It's incredible that Dobbs was done. But aside from that, it's Postdoc and others. There have been some massive glaring errors, so obviously there's a hole in the net.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that's been trending for a long time, that Supreme Court justices, there used to be something every couple of years where it was very high profile. Now, constant news cycle, social media, it's always high profile. We always know what's going on there. It used to be a bunch of nerdy lawyers who go to FedSoc conferences who knew what was going on at the Supreme Court. Now your grandma knows. She's reading X. So you got to have people that can handle the high pressure, the high stakes, the Supreme Court. And really, if I were Alito or Thomas, I'd want to know that they're going to have somebody that's of my mold, just like you said, some sort of guarantee. And of course, there's no movie drama where the Supreme Court justice talks to the president and has this, but you want some confidence the person nominated is going to carry on your vision of how the court should operate. Frankly, the conservative movement is ready to hate whoever is nominated because they're fed up with how the court's been operating, undermining the Trump agenda, undermining separation of powers, essentially just handing district court judges the power to overrule the president.
And how often are the conservatives wrong on this sort of thing? I remember when Kavanaugh was nominated, there was a lot of annoyance. He was a country club Republican, conservatives thought. There was a lot of annoyance, like, oh man, it should have been Amy Coney Barrett, who turns out to have been worse than Kavanaugh. But that was the conservative choice. That was what the right-wing senators said, no, it should have been ACB. Well, they ended up getting her, and then she's given us a host of liberal decisions, essentially. Is the conservative machine for bringing these lawyers up just completely broken, or is it focused on the wrong things? Where's it going wrong?
Well, I think where it's going wrong, it's not that the machine itself is wrong. There's certainly an elitist air to it. And in elite circles, all human beings want the same thing. They want to be part of a group, they want to have status within that group. And in elite circles, having status within that group means having Trump derangement syndrome. We've all talked about this before. This is an
old... a trans kid.
Yeah, exactly. And, the cocktail circuit for Georgetown isn't exactly the most Trump-friendly, but things are changing now. And it's back to the social media and constant pressure the protests outside their homes. Justices need to be able to withstand that. We need to measure that metric in addition to their legal bona fides. We need to know that they can withstand public pressure.
Being called a rapist. I mean,
Yeah, right.
If you're Donald Trump right now, do you want to have that seat open? Obviously, earlier is going to be better rather than later. We see what happens the later that it gets in his term. So to actually just go through and get something done quicker seems to be more advantageous for this administration.
That's a great point. It is and it isn't, because he only has essentially a year to fulfill his legislative agenda. Congress is going to be out to lunch next year on the campaign trail, and rightly so. We've got to keep the majority in the Senate and the majority in the House. So getting his legislative agenda done has to happen this year. And a big Supreme Court fight could certainly, slow that down or create obstacles, but it could also speed it up. It could provide emphasis for the Senate to get reconciliation done before there's a Supreme Court fight. And that's why it's important that we're talking about this now. People need to remember, hey, we're in that window. This could happen. If you want to have that Supreme Court pick, you need to speed it up on reconciliation and a number of other things.
Looking at just the way that this all goes down, I just go back to Trump in 2016, right? And he went through and he campaigned and he was making sure that everybody in the country knew that he was going to go through and have this Supreme Court that he does. Now, we're all still very upset as conservatives that this is the court that we have in front of us. But how do we go through and make sure then, again, if it is going to be somebody that is open, that we get a true conservative there on the court?
Yeah, I think the temptation for the Trump administration is going to be to pick someone that the president knows really well. Maybe if his sister was still alive, it'd be somebody like that. But there is still the Senate, and they have a lot of experience with the Senate confirmation process at this point. They know they have to pick somebody that can be confirmed by the Senate. Those two things will be in tension of what does the elitist Senate think of the nominee? Are they going to be characterized as just a Trump loyalist versus is it somebody that, is actually going to have the same vision of the world that the president does and how the Constitution should be interpreted and executive power and all of that? Somebody that's going to carry out this is his legacy. At the end of the day, he's got 4 years. The Supreme Court pick will have a lifetime.
Justice Mike Lee.
Well, that would be amazing.
His father sat in the state Supreme Court, right?
His brother did. And his father was Solicitor General under Reagan. He clerked for Alito. They have a long family history of being around the Supreme Court. He would be a great pick. There's possibly others too. Ted Cruz has been talked about as a great pick.
Ted Cruz the podcast?
He does have a great podcast. But those kinds of guys, and there may be somebody else out there, maybe somebody in the House, someone else in the Senate that fills that criteria. But the thing you're getting at here is they have the ability to withstand public pressure.
So what are the odds, though, that we actually go through and replace? Because if it is some of the people that we're talking about right now, we know that they have the stark conservative values that we are looking for. If we go through and we look at the court's future and just the shape that it could take, I don't trust people here in Washington, D.C. to do the right thing that often. I know it's crazy, but I love it. The weather's beautiful. It's been a great week. But when it comes to people going through and doing the right thing around here, we've seen this with Trump's picks already. So how would I actually go through and say, okay, I want to believe that whoever he picks is going to do a good job. But this could, if we get another Amy Coney Barrett in the seat, somebody that we think is on the team that actually isn't, how is that going to impact the court moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. You have to know somebody's record, and just looking at judicial opinions isn't enough. You've got to know their public record, speaking publicly, saying things. And a lot of people who are angling for the Supreme Court are in positions where they don't say things publicly for that very reason. Yeah, we got to flip it on its head and find people who have said things publicly. So, I think they should consider politicians. It doesn't have to be Mike Lee, though I do love him and think he would be amazing.
He's also so legal-minded, more than a lot of the others.
That's
how he approaches politics.
That's how his brain works, for sure. But the other thing to consider here is it's what you were getting at with like, what is the long-term implication for the court? And I think that's what the justices are going to be thinking about, Alito, Thomas, before they make any moves. They're thinking long-term because they've been in the position long-term. So they need that confidence. And we need signals from the administration of how they would approach this, I think.
So can I play devil's advocate and just say, Mike Lee, we all know and love Mike Lee, but what about what's happening in the Senate? And what would the future of the Senate would then look like without somebody that we know is going to go in there and have our back most of the time?
He's the most conservative member you're going to get from Utah in a while.
You're going to have big shoes to fill there, and that might be even more difficult than to fill a seat on the Supreme Court.
Well, you know the Senate inside and out. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm for Mike Lee being in the Senate because he's incredible at that. So, let's keep him there if we can. But yeah, you do need that sort of driving force in the Senate of somebody like Mike Lee, though the Senate has changed, I will say, playing devil's advocate on the other side of that. It's much more active than it has been in the past. It's much more conservative, focused on members actually getting to exercise their rights. And, what's happening right now is that Trump carries a big stick and has a lot of influence over the Senate. Will that be the case in 10 years? I don't know. So the long-term implications for the Senate, I don't know, of taking any of our good members out of the Senate or the House, there could be downsides.
What are some of the? I know that this is just looking into the future. By the way, I don't read tea leaves. I'm more of like a roller of bones. We do the hardcore guy.
Some dice.
Oh no, bones, casting bones. What are some of the cases that could potentially be coming our way? We've gone through transgenderism. We've gone through marriage. Maybe gay marriage will be revisited at some point. We've now done Roe v. Wade. We've done there's going to be a couple things coming up in executive power, but that's happening right now. That's not happening for the next Supreme Court justice before they join. What are some of the What, if you can think of any, battles that could be coming down that you want the Supreme Court to be so careful on? And the Second Amendment is so much more powerful than it was when I came to Washington, D.C. Thanks in part to Washington, D.C.'s incredibly stupid local government that just keeps on charging the Supreme Court, even though the Supreme Court's got a bigger army.
Yes, absolutely. Court watchers, people who watch it very closely, will probably have more sophisticated thoughts on this. But looking at the big picture, I think the fight is a continuation of Doge. I think the fight is the administrative state versus the constitutional Madisonian institutions of government, the power of the president, the power of Congress. There's a lot Congress can do to fix that. So far, we've only seen the executive branch doing it. There is talk of the REINS Act in Congress, and that absolutely has to pass if we want to see Doge fulfilled. But ultimately, the Supreme Court's going to play a role. And that will be the big fight. It's what's driving the left crazy right now. So we know that's where the fight's going to be over the next 10, 20 years.
So we got Glenn Beck interviewed the president earlier today. I just rushed over from that. And it's going to be airing right after the show. And one of the things he pointed out was that Donald Trump has taken, I think, over 10 times as many lawsuits as Barack Obama and George W. Bush. And it's only been in this term. It's only been something like that. And it's only been about 100 days. Do you think that the relief is actually coming from this court or future courts on these sorts of things? I'm not saying the Supreme Court ruling in every decision. I'm saying Article 2 powers being defended. The battle we're seeing right now over this El Salvadorian illegal immigrant seems to be about Article 2 powers. What can the president actually do?
That is a great question. And I don't know that we'll see relief from this court. There is a little known procedure in the rules of federal civil procedure that requires anytime there's an injunction that a bond has to be put up to cover the cost of that injunction. The government never asks to enforce it, and these judges haven't been issuing it, but it is required. The injunction is basically illegitimate without this bond. It's like when you put your mortgage in escrow, so that if the plaintiff, the person suing the government, is ruled wrong on the merits, when it gets to the merits, the actual case, they have to cover the cost. Now, the thing here is the cost of these nationwide injunctions, billions of dollars. The leftist activists who are putting up these lawsuits attacking Trump cannot afford billions of dollars in injunctions. They'll have to either limit the scope of their ask or stop doing it. Trump issued an EO on this, and the Supreme Court spoke about it. And in an opinion, they gave some what's called dicta, a side conversation about the injunctions. The House Judiciary Committee has pushed on this. Even the Wall Street Journal is publishing stuff on it. Yet it's still not happening, and I don't know why. But that is the answer for getting relief, and maybe the court can enforce that.
Yeah, who would
maybe it's up
enforce
to
it?
DOJ. DOJ needs to demand it. The court needs to say, okay, this nationwide injunction that costs the government, the taxpayers, billions of dollars is illegitimate unless you can put up the money for it. I don't think it was ever envisioned that some, district court judge in some random state would have power over the entire country.
Never.
And the way to limit that is using the rules that are in place. It's not the best solution, but it is a fix. And it would get us where we need to be, where we can limit some of this and have a reasonable conversation about it.